know it's been a couple of weeks since I did a YouTube video, but I've been traveling a whole bunch, going through Townsville and Cairns and then down to the Gold Coast for a writing conference. But I'm finally back home. So this week, I'm actually going to be diving into a little bit more writerly advice, specifically Robert Heinlein's 5 Rules for Writing. When it comes to writing advice and writing rules, my advice is to pick the tips and tricks that resonate with you while leaving the rest. If you find inspiration in another author's routine, or if you come across an interesting literary technique, consider giving those things a go. There's a lot of writing advice out there, and much of it is super conflicting. All you can do is test out the theories that intrigue you, and if a particular tool or practice doesn't work, then simply revert back to your old habits, preferences, or style. All writers have their opinions and viewpoints on how to best get things done, and today I'm going to be breaking down Heinlein's 5 Rules for Writing. If you don't know, Robert Heinlein was an American writer who broke into the science fiction community in the 1940s, and his controversial works continue to influence the genre today. Heinlein developed his 5 rules because aspiring writers continued to ask him how they could have a successful career as a writer. Heinlein admits that these 5 rules are particularly relevant to speculative fiction writers. However, he wasn't very nervous about sharing these secrets because although they may seem simple, they're actually incredibly difficult to follow. Rule number 1, you must write. Hey, don't you go rolling your eyeballs at me. I told you these rules were simple. Rule number 1 is you must write. And yet, how often have you heard a fellow writer harp on about their brilliant premise, only to discover that they haven't written a single word? It's all fine and dandy to have a fully formed manuscript in your head, but unless that story's on paper, it doesn't exist. You can't edit an imaginary story, and you certainly can't publish it. Writers are people who write. You don't have to write every day, and what you write doesn't have to be perfect, especially if it's a first draft. But if you want to be a published writer, then you must write. Rule number 2, you must finish what you write. And you thought number 1 was hard. It's one thing to start a project and an entirely different thing to finish it. If you've never completed a manuscript or short story, you must be patient with yourself. Plan for success by managing your time, by outlining if that's a part of your process, and by setting small goals. Rather than thinking, I need to write a whole book, break the project down into chunks. By thinking about your book in scenes or chapters, it's much more manageable and much easier for you to have that sense of achievement, to feel as though you're making progress. You can't write a book in a day. You can't even write one in a week. Unless you're Stephen King and you've snorted some really great coke, which is how he wrote Dolores Claiborne. You won't know what it takes to write a novel until you have written one. You won't know what level of discipline or time management is required. You won't know how to maintain a consistent voice or characterization. You won't know how to construct a plot or maintain narrative drive. You can read all the blogs on the internet and you can watch all the videos on YouTube, but the only way you're going to know how to write your novel is to write it. Rule number 3, you must refrain from rewriting except to editorial order. Now, rules number 1 and 2 are applicable to all writers, but this rule is a little bit more controversial. Remember, Heinlein was a science fiction writer whose stories were generally geared towards the pulpy magazines of the 1940s. The world is a different place, but there is value in this rule depending on the type of writer you are and what your definition of success is. If your aim is to win the Vogel, the Pulitzer Prize, or some other literary award, this rule is not applicable to you. If your aim is to produce a literary novel that is carefully constructed, then this rule is not for you. If your aim is to be traditionally published, then this rule is not for you. If you want to produce a high-quality self-published novel, this rule is not for you. If these are your goals, then you should be rewriting and editing your work long before you submit it to an industry professional, whether that be an agent, an editor, or publisher. However, if your goal is to have a short story published in an online magazine, small press, or your own blog, step 3 could work for you. This rule is especially applicable if you write genre fiction, particularly formulaic stories like Mills and Boon romances. It will also work for you if you are submitting to publishers who specialize in pulp fiction. And it may also work for you if payment isn't necessarily a big deal for you, you just want to get published. Perhaps a better way to phrase this rule, especially in today's market, is edit your work, but don't edit forever. A novel is never truly done, it's just worked to a level that the author and the other parties involved can live with, ideally. If your story is close to a publishable standard, and if the editor at a publishing house likes your work, then they will take the time to provide feedback with the intent that you resubmit. Rule number 4, you must put your story on the market. If you never hit the send button, then you're never going to get published. Emailing a story to an editor is nerve-wracking. It's an incredibly brave and courageous act to let someone read your work. But if you want your story to find an audience, then this step is a must. You can't get published if you don't submit your work to publishers. So be brave, do your research, and find the online magazines and publishing houses that might be interested in your work. The worst outcome is that they say no. But if you don't at least try, then you'll never know. Rule number 5, you must keep it on the market until it has sold. Don't let rejection stop you. Thanks to the internet, there is a slew of online publications for you to submit to. Just because your story has been rejected doesn't mean that the story is bad. There's many reasons why an editor may say no. Maybe your story is too similar to a work they've already published. Maybe your story isn't to their taste. Maybe your story isn't a good fit for the magazine, or they're simply over budget for this month. If you received a rejection email with feedback you agree with, revise your story and either resubmit to that magazine if the editor encouraged you to do so, or try another publication. If you don't receive any feedback, simply send it out to someone else. Remember to keep going. Personally, I get 10 to 20 rejections on any article or short story before I have success. Writing is a business, so don't take it personally. So there you have it, guys. That's Heinlein's 5 rules for writing. Though these rules may seem disturbingly easy, they are incredibly difficult to follow. If you liked this video, feel free to subscribe or check out my website, taraeast.com. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll receive weekly updates as soon as I upload, plus you'll get a free short story from me delivered straight to your inbox. You can also find me on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If Heinlein's rules really connected with you, or if you have any comments on the content in this video, please feel free to comment below. Happy writing, guys, and I'll see you next week.